Warning. I'm going to say the word diarrhea 30 times in this video. Hail and well met, Slayers of Giants. I'm supposed to be working on chapter 25 of my novel, Brick by Brick, but I have to take a little break to tell you about this because it's too funny to miss. Bricks and Minifigs is employing the explosive diarrhea style of public relations, and we may have just reached a new height of absurdity. I think they will be hard-pressed to ever supersede. Like, this is pushing out the diarrhea so hard they get hemorrhoids and make themselves vomit levels of ridiculous. Okay, let's back up a little to give you the full context. So, as many of you already know, in November of 2024, on a random Thursday night, I got a call from my wife, Chris, telling me to come to the Bricks and Minifigs franchise we owned and which she managed. A guy named Brandon Best had shown up to demand the keys. There were a lot of things we didn't know at the time. We didn't know corporate had sent him back in October of that year to secretly case the joint. And corporate had, by Brandon Best's partner Josh Johnson's own admission, told them they could take the place for whatever they could get it for. So Chris hopped on the phone with corporate, and they told her that they were taking the store and selling it to this guy without telling her he worked for them. So we were very nice to this Brandon Best at the time because we thought he was just some innocent franchisee who didn't know the mess he was stepping into. Chris very wisely recorded as much of the inventory in the store as she could, and she let the guy from corporate know he was on speaker, so we could legally record the phone call. And he fully admitted, with his human mouth and his full chest, that BAM was threatening us and making us take a loss for having a franchise with them. On a recorded phone call. So, you might be tempted to think, hey, that's not a very good business practice. Especially when you learn that their entire business model is built on recruiting new franchisees to open stores for them. According to folks who've run the numbers, BAM can't survive on the royalty fees they charge their franchises. They have to keep selling new franchises to exist. So maybe it's not the best idea to tell someone, out loud, on the phone, that doing business with BAM might result in BAM taking that business to sell to someone else and threatening the franchisee with such high legal fees that they can never fight back, because that might potentially dissuade future franchisees and make BAM's business model untenable. But it turns out this may just be par for the course for these people. This wasn't even the first bite of the bacteria-covered lettuce. They just hadn't learned the lesson from the first bout of diarrhea. They'd done this before. In multiple cases, they'd taken stores over, making these same threats. At least once they'd been sued for it, and they'd done some suing themselves. But they managed to keep their diarrhea in their own bathroom. The people either couldn't keep the lawsuits going because it was too expensive, or they could, so BAM just dropped their lawsuits and slinked away, and no one was the wiser. But in more than one case, they did to others exactly what they did to us, taking their stores and then selling them to someone else. Think about the profit margin. If your business hinges on selling franchises, and you can sell one, then take it back under some false pretext, then sell it again, that's a lot of money to be made. I own a small publishing company. Imagine if, when I sold someone a copy of a novel, I could get them to sign a contract. And then a year later, I come to them and I say, they violated the contract because they didn't read page 62 of the book. Only, they didn't read page 62 because I didn't put a page 62 in there. And back when they were reading it, they said, hey, there's no page 62 in here. And I said, I'm so sorry, that's on me. And they were kind to a small press publisher, and they let it slide. They thought it was bad practice, and they had some trouble making sense of the story without page 62, but they figured it out, and they were still going around telling people it was a pretty good book, though they had some reservations about recommending it because of the omission. And then, a year later, I called them up and said I was going to sue them for $100,000 for failing to abide by the contract unless they mailed me the book. And they're like, $100,000 for what? And I'm like, well, if you read the contract carefully, there's a clause that says that you must abide by the operations manual. I never sent you the operations manual because you didn't request one, but in that document it says you must write an Amazon review specifically about the part of the story narrated on page 62, and that there will be a daily fine if you don't do so. And those fines have now exceeded $100,000. So send me the book or I will bury you in legal expenses. And then I get the book back, I sell it to someone else with the same contract, and I get to keep making that profit on the same copy of the book. Now, this would be a terrible business model because the single book is only $24.99, and it wouldn't be worth it to spend hours on the phone with every buyer trying to get them to give one book back and resell it to someone else. Trust me, getting people to buy books is hard enough without adding the task of trying to get them to buy the same one twice. Once you buy a book from me, please read it, enjoy it, give it to a friend, donate it to your public library, write in the margins, whatever you want. It's yours. And I promise it will have a page 62. But maybe if that first copy was valued at $280,000 to $500,000, it might be worth the time and trouble to take it back and resell it. If, you had your conscience surgically removed. I don't ever want to run a business that way, personally. Heck, if you don't like a book and demand a refund, I will send you your money back, but that's just me. But here's the thing. If someone threatened you with a $100,000 lawsuit, you might just send the book back without a fight. But if they took something worth by their own advertising, more than $280K from you, you might just fight back. And maybe they could win by making it prohibitively expensive for some people to fight back. That seems to be what they were counting on. And if one of those people got a lawyer willing to work on a contingency basis, BAM could just drop their suit and go away to do it to somebody else. It appears that's what happened with the Bricks and Beyond store, where BAM's suit was dismissed with prejudice. But if just one of those victims managed to get the public's attention, let's say they recorded BAM's threats, the ones they admitted were threats, out loud, and then the public started supporting a GoFundMe campaign to fight back, wouldn't the whole record of BAM's way of doing business come out in discovery? It seems like a very tenuous, dare I say, fecal business model to me. Why fecal? What does Bricks and Minifigs have to do with explosive diarrhea? This brings us to two different models of crisis management: Tylenol and Taylor Farms. Tylenol is still considered to be the gold standard of crisis management. Here's what happened. In 1982, some people bought Tylenol, took the capsule, and died. Yeah, full-on died. You can imagine how scary this would have been for the average consumer. And for Tylenol. Some medications now just tell people they can die from their medicine in those little warnings, and it boggles my mind. Like, this may cure your restless leg syndrome, which is very annoying and keeps you from sleeping, or this pill may kill you, roll the dice. And we just hear those and go, they're covering their asses, it won't really kill me. If it wasn't going to kill anyone, they wouldn't put that in there. But back in 1982, I guess people were less tolerant of being killed by their medications, or at least Tylenol thought they would be. Oh, and for the record, Tylenol itself didn't cause the deaths. Some creepy murderer had put cyanide in the bottles. From what I can find, the murderer was never caught. A different creepy guy sent a letter to Johnson & Johnson saying that he did it, and that if they didn't give him $1 million, he would do it again. He went to jail for 13 years from that, but he was not the murderer. But what's important for our purposes today is Johnson & Johnson's response. They could have said, hey everybody, it was an isolated incident caused by a creeper putting cyanide in our pill bottles. Nothing to see here, go about your business. And then tried to wait it out as people associated their product with these murders. Or they could have done some kind of halfway thing where they recalled only the Tylenol in the greater Chicago area where the deaths took place, getting every bottle that the murderer would have had access to and saying, see, we dealt with it. Your bottle in San Diego or Poughkeepsie or Orlando is safe. Instead, they recalled 31 million bottles nationwide at a cost of over $100 million. And then they started putting those little seals inside the special child safety caps, then putting the plastic around the caps, so someone would have to break the plastic and puncture the seal to get to the meds, and you, the consumer, would know. Now, I'm no fan of Big Pharma. I know full well that they have fought against socialized medicine at every turn in order to make sure they keep profiting from our broken healthcare system. They use patent law to keep people from getting generic medications they need, and they work hand in hand with health insurance companies, who are some of the worst rent seekers in any industry in the world, adding nothing of value to the healthcare system and only increasing the cost for everyone while denying people necessary care and often costing human lives. No defense of Big Pharma here. But Johnson & Johnson's response, within the context of a pure profit capitalism model, which shouldn't apply to something like medication, but unfortunately did in 1982 and still does in 2026 because we haven't gotten our act together, is the gold standard because it showed that an investment, and not a small one, but $100 million, makes financial sense. We don't associate Tylenol with those murders. We associate them with the company that made that triple seal packaging ubiquitous. And while we might find it annoying when we're opening a pill bottle, it's nice to know no one could put something in that bottle in the store before you buy it. Thank you, Tylenol. And the numbers here back this up. According to what I've been able to find, Tylenol had made Johnson & Johnson $400 million the year before the cyanide situation. Then, in 1982, they made $350 million. I can't figure out if that figure includes the reductions of the $100 million they invested in the recall, or if that's just a reduction because of the scandal. Either way, they spent a full quarter of what they'd made in gross sales, not net, gross sales, in 1981 on a recall. And in 1983, the next year, they made $460 million. The recall worked. Fast forward to 2026. Taylor Farms. I'll bet you hadn't heard of Taylor Farms in 2025. I'll bet lots of you have heard of them now. You may have heard of the bacteria Cyclospora before. Taylor Farms didn't invent it, and this is not the first outbreak of Cyclospora. But you have heard of explosive diarrhea. Some reporter decided they would use that fantastic phrase to describe the results of this latest explosion of Cyclospora. Now, the trick with Cyclospora is that it takes a little while to go from the food to the explosive diarrhea phase. And in that time, a human eats different things. So, some epidemiological research is necessary to isolate which food caused the explosion, then to track that food back to where it was grown, processed, and distributed. And it was traced back to a farm where the lettuce was distributed by a company called Taylor Farms. Now imagine you were a CEO of a big agribusiness corporation. You would probably be paying closer attention to the news of an outbreak of Cyclospora than most people. And when some reporter dubbed it explosive diarrhea, you'd sit up straight, hop off the pot, and get to work making sure your products weren't the source, right? Because you don't want your products to be permanently associated with explosive diarrhea any more than Tylenol wanted their products to be associated with cyanide. You'd get out ahead of the story, right? Put a pin in that explosive diarrhea, because we'll be coming back to it. Taylor Farms did the opposite of Johnson & Johnson. They didn't find out they were the source of the explosive diarrhea and then do a huge recall of the products. To their credit, Taco Bell handled it right. Taco Bell knew we already associate their products with some gastrointestinal experiences we've all had at some point, so they quickly announced they would have no lettuce or tomatoes at all until the source could be found. Good on them. Because here's the thing. Cyclospora is no joke. 80s kids like me know a person can die from dysentery. We all died of dysentery a lot when we were kids. Our elementary school teachers, desperate for a smoke break, would teach us about computers and history simultaneously by plunking us down in front of Oregon Trail. And we would get dysentery and die. This was, as far as I can tell, the most important lesson of the game. And in a way, it really did prepare us for the internet, because we learned that computers, plus learning the history of settler colonialism, equals a whole lot of explosive diarrhea and death. In fact, the entire internet can probably be divided into people who are exposed to historical facts about settler colonialism and get frustrated and refuse to play anymore, and those who are exposed to ideas about settler colonialism and want to keep learning. But I digress. Here's what Taylor Farms did. They immediately called up the White House. They said, "Hey, we gave you some big-time donations. Make this go away." Not the FDA, the White House. And then, in a not at all suspicious follow-up, the FDA put out a statement that the lettuce they'd previously blamed had been a false positive. They still were going to recall the lettuce, they said. They were just not saying the cyclospora was coming from the lettuce they were recalling. And then Taylor Farms put out a press release saying the FDA had apologized to them. Then the next day, Taylor Farms said they were still recalling the lettuce and no longer getting it from the farm the FDA had identified. So, we did nothing wrong, but we're gonna do the thing we would do if we poisoned you. But we made sure the government agency that said we poisoned you said they were sorry to us. So you're fine. According to reporting from Wired, Taylor Farms donated over $2 million to conservative political action groups, including $1 million to MAGA Inc., Trump's super PAC, in 2025, and $3.6 million from 2020 to 2025. They generate more than $7 billion in annual revenue. I cannot say the millions they've given to Trump was an investment in their future damage control. That would be slanderous, and really, we can never know. In my experience, asking people why they support Trump doesn't reveal a lot of honest responses. Maybe they loved the idea of deporting 20 million people, mostly with brown and black skin, from a country with 12 million undocumented people. More quick math. Yes, that means 8 million US citizens. And yes, those deportations do mean concentration camps, because you can't deport 20 million people with teleportation. So maybe the folks at Taylor Farms weren't trying to buy influence. Maybe they just like the idea of putting millions of non-white people in concentration camps. As with all Trump supporters, we'll never know their true motivations, and future generations will just have to decide if they feel generous or skeptical when choosing among the more or less shameful options. But here's what we do know. Once the explosive diarrhea hit the fan, we know what they did. They called the White House. What they were leaning into is the White House's explosive diarrhea style of governance. See, this regime has learned that the best way to handle any situation is to lie. And if the first lie doesn't work, tell a bigger lie, and then 10 more lies. And it's important that we understand why they have adopted this strategy. Because it works. Up to a point. If your goal was to amass as much power and wealth as possible, and you don't have any other concerns about hurting people or a legacy or the well-being of the country, this is undeniably a good strategy. Trump has been seated in the White House twice. Whether those elections were truly on the up and up is debatable, but the outcome is not. He got the office, and he used it to enrich himself and his family more than every other president combined, and then multiplied by more than 1,000. If you're like me, these numbers become incomprehensibly large. Let's say you made $50K this last year. Let's say you did that job for 100 years. Do you want to work for 100 years? Too bad, because that's what it will take for you to get $5 million. Okay, you don't like the idea of working for 100 years for the same boss at the same wage? Too bad, because you'll have to work there for 4,000 years to make as much as Trump and his family stuffed in their pockets in the last year alone. And the taxes you paid on your $50K last year? Guess where that went? So again, if the lying is intended to produce power and wealth, it works. Now, someone seeing this is like, he doesn't lie, he tells it like it is. I have challenged people with this before. Please, try to find me any single human being who has told more documented falsehoods than Donald Trump. During his first term, the Washington Post counted 30,573 false or misleading claims, an average of 21 per day. Now, I know some of you are going to just have a knee-jerk partisan reaction and say, but Biden, but Obama, the media always lies. Fine. Put up or shut up. Make your own list. Find me the lies. Although, I think you may have an easier time if you look for some case study of a compulsive liar. Maybe someone who was institutionalized and their therapist had to count the lies they told. That might be easier. Find me a case study of someone who told more than 30,573 lies in a 4-year period. I would appreciate knowing if there was ever anyone who lied this much. But the lies work. And in this second administration, all the people with any shred of self-respect are gone, and the whole apparatus is a bunch of sycophants who are more concerned with keeping the boss happy than with their own dignity. So they will not only repeat his lies, they will tell even more to try to show him they're modeling themselves on his style. And they do it because it works. About a third of the country hears the lies and says, "But Obama, but Biden, but the media." Yeah, we heard you a few seconds ago. And in a broken system in which gerrymandering and the Electoral College allow a minority of voters to choose our leadership, if you can convince a third of the population to believe your lies and another 16% to be so afraid of public libraries and firefighters and public schools, what they call socialism, that they will always vote with their team, you can get to 49% and beat the person who got 50%. That's our system. And then you can say, hey, if you ever want to have a hotline to power, just give us money, and when you give people explosive diarrhea, you'll be able to get us to stop the FDA from telling people you gave it to them. And this works. Until it doesn't. Because eventually it runs up against reality. Trump learned the double down and never acknowledge error mindset from his mentor, Roy Cohn. Yeah, the same guy who was the chief counsel for Senator Joseph McCarthy during the Red Scare communist hearings from 1950 to 1954, that Roy Cohn, in case you're wondering why they are telling you need to be scared of communism in 2026. And some people on both sides of the aisle admire that style and have adopted it, which is a shame because they are all human and all make mistakes. But if we keep electing people who cannot ever admit they are human and make mistakes and learn from them, we'll keep getting public policy that's rooted in those mistakes and can't improve, made by people who care more about the optics of an embarrassing soundbite than the policy we sent them there to make. And eventually that bad policy becomes obvious. So obvious even the third of Americans who are posting "Trump is Jesus AI slop" can't deny the lies. We won the war in Iran. Gas prices are low. There's no inflation. You aren't stuck on the toilet with explosive diarrhea. That's just a false positive blasting out of you because a big donor paid the White House to say so. Guess you don't have explosive diarrhea then. Go to the gas station and get some of that cheap gas and some food that's certainly cheaper because Trump said it is. Use that big raise you got at work because Trump said your wages are going up. Don't worry, as long as you have your red hat on, no one will treat you like you smell like explosive diarrhea because you totally don't. See, the lying gets to the point where it's just absurd. And maybe we should call this the point of explosive diarrhea. Because while a company like Taylor Farms may win in the sense that they only invested 0.0004% of their annual revenue into Trump's pockets to get the FDA to declare their lettuce was a false positive, well, Johnson & Johnson, on the other hand, invested 25% of their previous year's revenue to improve their reputation. I will not think of cyanide when someone mentions Tylenol. But for as long as I live, if anyone says Taylor Farms, I'm going to think of explosive diarrhea. They have the money and the stink. Or maybe we should call this the bricks and minifigs crisis management strategy. Remember when I said you should put a pin in that part of the Taylor Farms story where they became aware of the outbreak, but then did everything to avoid taking responsibility? So when Bricks and Minifigs took our store, we did hire an attorney, and she sent them a letter, and their response was that they would sue us back for hundreds of thousands of dollars if we pushed the issue. And for a while, that worked. This is the double down Roy Cohn model. It works until it doesn't. Because Reckless Ben heard about the collection that had been on consignment within our store, and he released his first video. An explosion of attention online. Boom. Now, BAM could have done the right thing and not taken our store. But they'd taken other stores before ours, so they learned they could get away with it. And BAM knew about the Mansell collection on consignment in the store, but they didn't know who Reckless Ben was when he confronted them about it, so Amnon McNeff simply lied and said he'd never heard of it, then in the same conversation that he had, but didn't feel obligated to pay for it, and that he'd do so when he was shown documentation, but wouldn't acknowledge that documentation, and would send Brian Mansell a complete copy of the inventory, but then wouldn't send a complete copy of the inventory. It was a mess of lies and contradictions. But that had always worked for him before. However, once Ben's video came out, they had another opportunity to change course. They'd missed the moment to do what Tylenol did, but they didn't have to go full explosive diarrhea and permanently associate their brand with this story. And yet they did. They doubled and tripled and quadrupled down. They went out of their way to try to get Ben arrested, giving demonstrably false claims to the police, which the police trusted without any real investigation, making the police complicit in their behavior and turning a story about Lego into a story about police corruption. They went on podcasts and TV, repeating false and defamatory statements and building an even stronger case for Chris and me. They kept releasing press releases on their website with information which kept changing, but always written with this tone of certainty and with no acknowledgement that they'd screwed up. Smell familiar? Taylor Farms? And then we get to today, when we reach what might be peak poop on the scale of explosive diarrhea, if explosive diarrhea is a measure of the absurdity of the results of a corporate PR crisis response. This exceeds anything I've read about in Taylor Farms' response to their soiled lettuce. So there's this group of internet sleuths who've put together something called the BAM map. This is an incredible, exhaustive trove of documents. It's amazing. I admit, I haven't read it all, and I'm one of the plaintiffs in a lawsuit against BAM. I can't keep up with everything. They've found the disclosure documents BAM had to file to be on the legal up-and-up when they tried to get people to buy their franchises, found the errors and omissions in those, which might be federal crimes. I'm no lawyer, but if there's a federal requirement to disclose something, like that your company is currently suing some other franchise, and you don't include that, isn't that a violation of a federal reporting requirement and therefore a crime? They found the whole web of LLCs connecting BAM and their CEO and COO to a company called Legally Mine, which helps people shield assets from lawsuits by creating webs of LLCs. They found an old interview where the CEO talks openly about his inability to see people as human beings. And they found training materials which direct employees to try to manipulate children to maximize the amount of money their parents or grandparents will spend in the store. Okay, then this very clever guy, Mark Nemke, made a spoof website called Legally Mime, which has these satire articles about a fictional group of mimes who will offer to protect your assets with their vows of silence and circus of LLCs. It's a very funny site. If you've been paying attention to all of this, lots of deep cuts for people who will get those jokes. Then the BAM map got a hold of this training material, the one I mentioned that advises sales reps to attempt to manipulate children. And so Mark Nemke, the guy doing the Legally Mime, wrote a spoof of what he thought a bunch of clowns working for this fictional Legally Mime might do when they heard that news. So he made this post titled, "Formal Notice to the BAM Map. Impending Silence Protocols," which says, Legally Mime hereby issues a formal final warning to the BAM map and its associated slander networks. Should this deliberate campaign of misinformation persist, our legal command will deploy the full weight of the firm's non-verbal enforcement apparatus. We will not only secure absolute victory in our ongoing trademark infringement case over the Badass Mimes network, but we will immediately initiate new comprehensive silence measures. These impending containment protocols directly reflect the strategic asset protection parameters outlined in our formal brand review presented at MimeCon 2026. We advise our partners, clients, loyal fans, and regional Mime syndicate to pay close attention as we demonstrate the true unyielding power of the firm. And then, a day or two after the satirical spoof from Legally Mime, the real BAM sent a sort of quasi-legal threat to the BAM map. I say quasi-legal because it claims to have come from BAM Franchising Inc. and or the applicable BAM entity, but does not include the name of any attorney. It demands that the BAM map, quote, immediately remove or disable access to the copied BAM support portal, copied articles, images, screenshots, instructional materials, and any other substantial reproductions of BAM-owned works. It directs the people creating the BAM map to, quote, confirm in writing that the identified materials have been removed and preserved, and it directs their response to legal.team@bricksandminifigs.com. Now, Imagine if I sent an email to the Walt Disney Corporation, not from my attorney, but from legalteam@benjamingorman.com, and I demanded they stop using any image of Yoda on the grounds that he's a bald teacher and I'm a bald teacher, so they just have to do what I say. Do you know what Disney's lawyers would do? Well, they might sue me for threatening to sue them, but more likely, they would just drop that email directly into the trash folder. Because it's not real. If we're being generous, it's possible this didn't come from BAM at all. Maybe. But we recently learned that the CEO of Bricks and Minifigs, Ammon McNeff, is being sued by his former law firm for $500,000 for unpaid legal expenses. And his former company, Legally Mine, was censured by the Utah State Bar for presenting themselves as though they could offer legal advice, when in fact they aren't lawyers. So do you think it's possible this came from the same people who can't afford lawyers anymore and have a track record of presenting themselves as though they are lawyers? If this really did come from BAM, let's just reflect on this. A guy who is spoofing them makes a post about mimes trying to protect their embarrassing clown training materials from being revealed by the BAM map. And the very next day, someone, at least purporting to represent BAM, does the exact same thing in real life. They are, quite literally, behaving like a spoof of themselves. Now, you may have heard of the Streisand effect. This was the instance where singer and actress Barbra Streisand filed a $50 million lawsuit against a photographer named Kenneth Adelman, demanding he remove an aerial photo of her Malibu mansion from a public coastal erosion website. The picture had been seen 6 times. Not 6 million times. 6. That was all. But the lawsuit brought so much attention to the photographer that it was viewed over 420,000 times on the website and has now been seen millions of times on news sites, Wikipedia, and more. Oops. But that was a one-off error, a single, though giant, miscalculation. BAM has now doubled down so many times that they've achieved another level. Their pattern of taking franchises back to resell them bit them in the ass when they got even more greedy and decided to take a store that they knew had a huge collection inside on consignment. They counted on us not fighting back. They counted on Brian Mansell not fighting back. They had no idea Reckless Ben would appear. And for a while, they were correct. We couldn't find a lawyer to take our case. Brian couldn't find a lawyer, and Ben wasn't on the scene because none of us even knew who he was. And now we find ourselves in a situation where there is so much attention to this case that someone has created a whole map of BAM's shenanigans, and a very clever guy has created a whole website spoofing them and their Legally Mine asset holding company, and the actual company may then have done almost exactly what the spoof company predicted they would do when some more embarrassing documents came to light. To go back to our numbers, Tylenol invested 25% of its previous year's profits and cleaned up their reputation. Taylor Farms got in bed with the Trump administration for only a fraction of 1%, and they ended up stinking of explosive diarrhea forever. And Bricks and Minifigs, which claims to have made $90 million last year, could have bought our store and Brian Mansell's collection outright for less than a single percentage of the previous year's gross revenues, and then run the store and sold the remainder of the collection, profiting on both. But now, they're far closer to Taylor Farms than Tylenol in terms of their reputation, but without the benefit of next year's lettuce money. They chose the explosive diarrhea route and have ended up worse than Taylor Farms. Until today, it seemed BAM had finally figured out that making more statements and doing more interviews is very bad for them. Maybe. We'll see tomorrow if they put out a statement saying that they are nothing like explosive diarrhea and they're sending the American Forks Police Department to break down my door for daring to suggest it. But even if they realize that the Legally Mime site is a parody and they shouldn't be looking to replicate it in real life, this story cannot go away, even if they want it to, because we're still suing them. But we need your help. The only reason we haven't disappeared into obscurity like the other franchise owners who were ripped off by BAM is because so many of you have been generous supporters of our legal fund, which has allowed us to keep going after BAM. And since they are not choosing to go the mediation route, we'll have to take them to court, where there will be real discovery, and we're all going to learn a whole lot more. So, if you want to keep pushing this beyond the explosive diarrhea stage to the truly satisfying conclusion, there are two ways to help: the direct way and the fun way. The direct way is through the GoFundMe Chris set up. That's here. Some of you are going to look at that number and say, hey, that's a lot of money they've raised already. That's because you and I are normal people, and to us, that seems like a lot. It's going to cost a lot more than that, like maybe twice that. We'll need forensic accountants, more lawyers, people to analyze all the stuff we can get from them in discovery, and those people don't come cheap, so every dollar helps. Or, and this is admittedly more fun, you could get a shirt or a book from Not a Pipe Publishing. Our Schrodinger's U-Haul shirts are selling like hotcakes, but Chris has a ton of other great designs there, so check those out. Personally, I want to encourage you to get books, but that's my bias as a book guy. We have a whole little library by incredibly talented authors, and even though Not a Pipe doesn't get much per book after the costs and the author's royalties, every little bit helps, and you get a great story to read. Oh, there is a third way if you yourself have something you'd like to plug. You could do what author Duncan Wilson has done, and advertise on my channel. Duncan Wilson is the author of, among other titles, A Random Tavern. It tells the story of a forlorn stranger who wanders into a random tavern in a seaside town, weary and wanting of a witness to his tale of woe. Terrible are his recollections, and impossible are his adventures through horrifying dimensions of time, space, and previously unknown worlds of ancient and unimaginable elder gods and demons. Join Randolph as he recounts his unnerving journey of strange stars and the sinister celestial spirits that dog his steps and hunger for his very humanity. I'd love to tell folks about something you created like Duncan Wilson's A Random Tavern. And that kind of support also will help us compel Bricks and Minifigs to release the documents necessary to understand whatever they are hiding that made them think this situation is somehow better for them than just purchasing the store and the Mansell collection. Are you curious to find out why they have chosen to go the explosive diarrhea route? I am. Let's find out together.